In 2009, Kelsey Emily Collins, an 18-year-old Seattle teen, went missing after testifying against a man for child sex trafficking. She was never seen again. A quick disclaimer, this video includes topics such as sex trafficking, domestic abuse, and drug use. Please view at your own discretion. Kelsey Emily Collins had a rough start in life. Born in 1991 with a severe case of Hirschsprung's disease, a birth defect that affects one's colon, Emily spent most of her first year of life in the hospital, where she received a multitude of life-saving surgeries. Her mother, Sarah, never left her side. When Emily was 2.5, her mother divorced Emily's father, citing his heavy drinking. When Emily was nearly 4, Sarah married another man, but he proved to be abusive, beating Sarah and her 4 children, including Emily, regularly. Emily began having night seizures at age 6, which did not stop until the family escaped the home. Sarah worked in the genetics lab at a research hospital during this time, and despite the fact that she had a job and income, she still found it difficult to leave the man she was married to. Then one day in 1998, Sarah woke her children in the middle of the night, and the family left their home, never looking back. Sarah and the kids moved to the West Coast and took up residence in transitional housing for battered families. They lived there for 10 months while they changed all of their names and social security numbers before settling in the Seattle area when Emily was around 8 years old. Emily's name was changed to Kelsey Emily Collins, but she still chose to go by her birth name, Emily. Around the time the family settled in Washington, Sarah's 2 older daughters, who were well into their teens, divulged to Sarah that their stepfather had molested them. This allegation landed the stepfather in jail for 22 years. By age 8, Emily was not just a victim of domestic violence. She also witnessed her sister's sexual abuse as well as the violence inflicted on her siblings and mother at a very young age. Even with their abuser in jail, Sarah explained that she and her 4 children all had different problems that haunt them to this day. One of her daughters is a binge drinker. One isolated herself and began smoking marijuana at a young age. And Sarah's youngest, a boy, suffers from separation anxiety, truancy, and substance abuse. The family tried individual and family counseling, social workers, hospitalizations, and medications, but healing was a long process that continues to this day. As she grew, Emily struggled academically and was plagued by low self-esteem. She attended special education classes at school where she received speech therapy, services for her learning disability, as well as help with a significant hearing impairment. It is unclear if the deafness was from abuse she suffered as a child or was something she was born with. School records showed that by 10th grade, Emily was doing math at the 3rd grade level and could barely read at the 5th. When she was 11, she told her mother that a young teen boy around her own age had assaulted her, but unfortunately there was not enough evidence to press charges. It was at this time that Emily's life began to spiral downwards. By age 12, she was sexually active, began skipping class, drinking and using drugs. At age 12, she stole her mother's car and totaled it. Soon after, she was running away from home in short stints. At age 13, Emily stole a neighbor's truck for a joyride, and her family had to call the police, which began a 2-year-long journey with the juvenile justice system. From age 13 to 15, Emily still skipped school and was constantly in trouble with the law. Around 2007, Emily began seeing an older boy who was in his late teens. She was so enamored with this new man in her life that she wrote his name over and over again on a sparkly blue poster and hung it in her room. He bought her flowers, shoes, and dinners, and she thought him the perfect gentleman. But the new boyfriend was more than an innocent crush. Soon he had convinced Emily to work for him by selling drugs. This man's identity has never been made public, and it is unclear if he was a minor or an adult at this time. One day her boyfriend told her that they could make more money if she started doing a different type of work. "I couldn't believe he was asking me to be a whore. The next thing I knew I was," recalled Emily in rehab later. The connection forged between a pimp and an underage victim is so unique it has a name. It is called a trauma bond. It is a tragic combination of violence but also protection from other sex workers and pimps. It creates a bizarre dynamic where the young woman begins to see her pimp as giving life simply by not taking it. This seems to be what occurred between Emily and her drug-slinging boyfriend. This type of bond happens in other forms of abusive relationships as well. From October to December of 2007, Emily was picked up by police 5 or 6 times for solicitation. Using a fake name and age, she walked the streets as Lady Dollars by night and attended her high school classes at Mariner High School during the day. They had Emily call her mother and tell her she was visiting friends for the weekend in Olympia, when in reality they were planning on selling the 16-year-old on the streets of Stumptown. Donico bought her food, lingerie and condoms, and in return Emily gave him the $1,000 to $1,500 she could make nightly on the streets of Portland, Oregon. It wasn't long before Collins was arrested after exiting a car in downtown Portland. She was booked for prostitution, but there she met an officer who was different. Detective Sergeant Doug Justice, head of Portland's trafficking task force, explained to Emily that she was a victim who couldn't consent to dating Johns. Rather than a stint in juvie, she could expect court-ordered rehab instead, as Oregon attempts to treat underage sex workers as what they are, victims. It took a while, but over time Emily opened up. She said she was tired of the lying and told Eustace everything, including the fact that she was a child and she was from Washington. She admitted that pimps and other girls sometimes beat her. A rival pimp had even slashed her hand with a box cutter once. Officials called Sarah Collins, who drove to Portland to retrieve her daughter and take her home to Everett. Several months after Emily's Portland arrest, Donico Terrell Johnson and Lisa Miles were both arrested for interstate sex trafficking of a minor and were put in jail awaiting trial. Emily Collins, then 17, agreed to testify for the prosecution, but the case took 16 months before reaching a grand jury. Even though she was living at home on probation and was attending outpatient rehabilitation, she was lured back into the scene and continued working the streets of North Seattle using the name Lady Dollars well into 2009. Sarah Collins had encouraged her daughter to testify and thought that the process might be healing, but Emily was scared. At one point she was tracked down by Johnson's cousins who threatened her with violence for testifying, but she stayed strong. She sat outside the courtroom in the car and cried, Sarah said. She could have run at that point. She wasn't in handcuffs. She didn't, though. She sat there and cried on my shoulder and said, Mummy, I am scared. Emily testified in front of the grand jury in Portland in April 2009, and Donico Tyrell Johnson was indicted for interstate sex trafficking of a minor. Portland prosecutors told Sarah that her daughter wasn't in too much danger now that Johnson was behind bars awaiting trial. Sarah attempted to get her daughter, still in high school, counseling to get her through the process of testifying, but only a few weeks later Emily turned 18 and was no longer eligible for the services afforded to underage victims. The red tape was just too much, and she continued to work Aurora Avenue North. The Disappearance. About 1 month later, on May 9, 2009, as federal prosecutors planned the trial against Johnson and Miles, Emily began seeing a new boyfriend, a man who lived in Seattle. On Sunday the 9th, Emily left her family home in Everett, planning on taking either the Sound Transit number 510 or Metro number 100-358 into Seattle, but she never arrived at her boyfriend's home. At the time, Emily only had her cell phone, her MP3 player, her hairbrush, and a few dollars for bus fare stored in a small black purse. She took no clothes, toiletries, or savings with her. On May 10th, Sarah awoke to find her daughter had not come home. She called Emily's boyfriend, but he claimed she had never arrived. Sarah called her daughter's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. After a few days, Sarah reported Emily missing to Everett police. Tragically, Emily's birthday had just passed, and as an adult, police were uninterested in finding her, especially when they discovered her criminal record. They assumed that she would come home soon. Sarah was discouraged from hanging missing flyers, as federal prosecutors worried that attention surrounding the disappearance would hamper the case against Donico Johnson and Lisa Miles. When prosecutors heard about Emily's disappearance, they were not initially worried and told the Collins family that they didn't believe Emily was in danger due to being a witness. After all, she had never asked for witness protection or told prosecutors that she felt scared. It doesn't appear she ever even told prosecutors about Johnson's family members' threats. But as the trial inched nearer, and no trace of Emily surfaced, law enforcement across 2 states, Washington and Oregon, began to look for Emily in earnest, months after she was last seen. They discovered that Emily's phone had begun going to voicemail, starting at 8 p.m. on May 9th, only 2.5 hours after she was last spotted leaving her residence, even though no one could get in contact with Collins after 8 p.m. on that day. Her phone continued emitting signals in the Seattle area for the next 2 weeks, like someone was occasionally turning it on to check it. Emily's boyfriend claimed she never arrived in Seattle as promised. Police initially focused most of their attention on this man, as he wasn't only Collins's romantic partner, he was also potentially the last person to see her alive, an allegation he of course denied, after ample investigation into Emily's boyfriend and her family members. Other avenues were looked into. Emily's family has always maintained that Johnson's family members or associates were to blame. Sarah even claims that her daughter's first boyfriend, the man who tricked her into prostitution in the first place, was never considered as a suspect 5 months after Emily was last seen. Charges against Donico Tyrell Johnson and Lisa Miles were dropped, and the search for Emily all but stopped. According to Sarah, the investigation didn't actually start until the trial was nearing, which meant potential evidence and witness testimony was lost or forgotten. The Collins sisters say that they felt that their sibling was used by prosecutors and thrown away like trash. Law enforcement, of course, sees the case in a different light. They clarify that Emily Collins was not offered protection because she never asked for it. She never even told anyone except her family that she had been threatened by Johnson's relatives. Moreover, Emily did often drop out of sight, so her initial disappearance wasn't out of the ordinary. And Sarah, although she claims she knew something was wrong right away, didn't report her daughter as missing for almost a week, meaning crucial hours were lost. As for focusing on her family and boyfriend, law enforcement states that they have to start with the obvious suspects first. While they admit that it is possible, even probable, that Emily met with foul play due to her role in the trial against Johnson, it is equally possible that someone she knew, such as a customer, or even a random predator, is to blame for Emily's disappearance. In fact, there isn't any evidence a crime was even committed. Because of this detail, the Collins family was and is unable to collect any victims' compensation or take advantage of other social services afforded to the families of crime victims. But whatever happened, criminal or not, an 18-year-old girl, the daughter of a loving mother, and sister to 3 adoring siblings with her whole life ahead of her, vanished into the night, never to be seen again. Aftermath. With the case against Miles and Johnson dropped, one might be afraid that these two would be out on the streets again. Thankfully, both were indicted almost immediately for the same crime, except this time the girl they were charged with trafficking was only 14 years old, some sources say 15. This girl became the star witness at trial. Like Emily, she was African American and was lured into sex work at a very young age. She was offered protection in exchange for her testimony, and her words put Johnson and Miles in federal prison. The fact that these two predators were off the streets afforded little comfort to the Collins family, who felt like Emily had been used by the same system that she had once been in trouble with. They were angry that the other victim was offered protection when Emily wasn't. Years have passed, and still Kelsey Emily Collins remains missing. Sarah Collins still works tirelessly to educate the public on the reality of modern-day slavery, and still tries to keep her daughter's case in the spotlight, but she has never been found. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to give this video a like if you enjoyed it. See you soon, and remember, stay vigilant and stay safe.